Welcome to this deep dive. Today, we're getting into the papacy of Pope Francis.
That's right. We've got a load of material here looking at the big shifts in the Catholic Church under him.
Yeah, we're looking at the history behind it, where things might be headed. The plan is to really pull out the key stuff for you.
Exactly. We want to give you a clear picture of the reforms, the internal debates, and this big push to connect with younger people today.
Okay, let's jump in. March 13th, 2013. That date sticks out, doesn't it?
It does. The election of Jorge Mario Bergoglio, Pope Francis. Kind of out of the blue for many.
And the name itself, Francis.
Yeah.
Wow, no pope had ever chosen that name.
Right. Instantly makes you think of St. Francis of Assisi. Poverty, simplicity, reform, care for creation.
Yeah.
Huge signal.
What made that specific name choice so, well, impactful right then?
Well, think about who came before. Pope Benedict XVI, a very different figure, much more focused on, say, doctrine, continuity.
An intellectual heavyweight.
Exactly. So choosing Francis immediately suggested, a shift, maybe towards something more pastoral, more outward-looking, definitely focused on the poor, the environment. It was potent symbolism given the crises brewing.
And speaking of crises, he didn't exactly inherit a calm situation, did he?
Not at all. It's really interesting when you look back. He's stepped into quite a mess, frankly.
You had Benedict VI's resignation, which was, almost unheard of.
A huge shock to the system.
Then the clergy sexual abuse scandal. The damage from that was just immense. Still is.
Devastating for trust, absolutely. And on top of that, you had the whole Vatileaks thing, issues with Vatican money administration.
Right, and falling church attendance, especially in the West. It was a convergence of really serious challenges.
That's such a crucial backdrop. The institution was hurting, dealing with internal fights, losing touch externally. You could see why people felt something different was needed. A new approach, maybe.
And Francis definitely brought a different approach. That metaphor he used early on the church as a field hospital after battle. What did you make of that?
That image is fascinating, isn't it? It completely reframes the church's role.
How so?
Well, instead of like a fortress defending doctrine or maybe a museum preserving the past,
Right.
he presented it as a place for healing, immediate care, going out to where people are hurting, on the edges.
It's a real shift in emphasis from focusing primarily on, say, getting the doctrine perfectly clear or that kind of energetic evangelization we saw before.
Exactly. Though those things are still part of it, of course, but the priority, the image, was now healing, closeness. That field hospital idea really struck a chord in a world feeling pretty wounded itself.
And that field hospital concept seemed to drive his early moves, didn't it? Like his very first trip outside Rome.
To Lampedusa, yeah.
Yeah.
That tiny island right on the front lines of the migrant crisis in the Mediterranean.
What was the significance there?
Hugely symbolic. He went there and condemned what he called the globalization of indifference towards migrants.
I remember the images, the mass he celebrated on an altar made from bits of a wrecked migrant boat.
Incredibly powerful, and throwing a wreath into the sea for those who died trying to cross. These weren't just gestures.
No.
They were a direct challenge, especially to wealthier nations. He even linked it back to the Bible, to Herod's massacre, drawing this line between ancient and modern suffering.
And later, that sculpture in St. Peter's Square, Angels Unaware, the boat with migrants from different eras.
Right, reinforcing that same message. A constant focus on those arriving, those who are often invisible.
And this concern for the marginalized, it goes beyond just migrants, right? His teachings really emphasize social justice, critiquing economic inequality.
Oh, definitely. For people working in social justice ministries, this focus on the preferential option for the poor felt like, well, getting back to the core of the gospel.
Like Sister Norma Pimentel said, he's bringing to life the message of Jesus in today's world.
That captures how many felt, yes. But it's also stirred debate, hasn't it? Especially somewhere like the U.S. Some see his statements on things like migration or the economy as maybe getting too political, rather than sticking purely to the spiritual or moral side.
So what are the bigger implications of this focus? Is it a major departure?
Well, if you look at his big documents like Evangelii Gaudium,
The joy of the gospel, yeah?
yeah, he says point blank, such an economy kills. That's strong language.
Very strong.
And then in Laudato Si, on the environment, he connects ecological damage directly to economic exploitation. He talks about the myth of unlimited material progress, this throwaway culture.
That directly challenges a lot of assumptions in developed countries.
It does. Now, you have conservative critics like Robert George who worry that maybe he's unfairly demonizing free markets.
Okay.
But Supporters would argue, quite rightly, that this critique is actually well within the tradition of Catholic social teaching, that teaching has always put human dignity and the common good above pure, unchecked capitalism.
So he's not necessarily changing doctrine, but maybe changing the emphasis, highlighting things that challenge Western economic models.
I think that's a good way to put it. He's definitely turning up the volume on certain aspects of the tradition.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit. Let's talk about some of those really complex, debated issues inside the church. Divorced and remarried Catholics, for instance. That was huge.
Yes, a major focus of those synods on the family in 2014 and 2015. It all led up to the document Amoris Laetitia, The Joy of Love.
And what was the outcome there? Did things change?
Well, he reaffirmed the traditional teaching on marriage being indissoluble. But, and this is the key part, he opened a door.
A door.
A pathway, maybe, for some divorced and married Catholics to possibly receive communion again. It wasn't a blanket permission, though. It involved a process of discernment.
Discernment, meaning what exactly?
Basically, talking it through carefully with a priest, looking at their specific situation, guided by their own conscience.
And how did that go down?
Oh, it caused quite a stir, a considerable reaction.
I remember traditionalists were deeply concerned, weren't they? Worried it undermined basic teaching on marriage.
They were. They felt it created confusion. And on the other side, many progressives felt it didn't go far enough, hoping for more explicit changes.
And didn't some cardinals formally challenge him on it? The dubia.
Yes, a group submitted formal questions, the dubia, asking for clarification. It really showed how divided the interpretations were.
Did he answer them?
Interestingly, no, not directly. Which perhaps tells you something about his approach, maybe that these complex pastoral realities need more than just a simple yes or no.
Another really sensitive area. The church and LGBTQ plus Catholics. His comment early on, "Who am I to judge?" That got so much attention.
It really did. That phrase alone signaled a significant shift, at least in tone, a different posture.
And Amoris Laetitia also touched on this.
Yes, it stressed respecting the dignity of everyone, regardless of sexual orientation. That was important.
But the really big moment on this came more recently, didn't it, with Fiducia Supplicans?
That's the one. The 2023 declaration allowing priests to offer blessings to same-sex couples.
But not blessing the union itself as marriage, right? They were very clear on that distinction.
Extremely clear.
Right.
It explicitly stated this doesn't endorse same-sex marriage or change doctrine on marriage.
Okay.
But even with that clarification, the reaction was, well, intense. Polarized doesn't even quite cover it.
Yeah, the reactions were all over the map, weren't they?
Completely. You had whole bishops' conferences, especially in Africa, saying publicly they wouldn't implement it.
Citing cultural context, potential scandal, Cardinal Ambongo was quite vocal.
Exactly. They felt it would cause too much confusion in their specific situations.
But then in many Western countries, the reaction was quite different.
Much more positive, generally.
Mm-hmm.
Seen as a step forward, a sign of welcome. Figures like Father James Martin, groups like New Ways Ministry, saw it as recognizing the spiritual lives and needs of LGBTQ plus people and their relationships.
It really throws into sharp relief the challenge of leading a global church, doesn't it? So many different cultures, viewpoints.
Absolutely. It shows that unity in a global church like this doesn't necessarily mean rigid uniformity in every single practice or interpretation. It's a massive balancing act.
Okay, let's talk about his ideas for how the church itself should run. This concept of synodality keeps coming up.
Synodality, yeah, it's a key theme for him. At its heart, it literally means walking together.
Walking together.
It's about listening, dialogue, discernment, involving everyone, lay people, priests, bishops, everyone, not just top-down decisions.
And we saw that in action recently with the big synod on synodality.
Exactly. That was a prime example. You had lay people, including women, not just participating, but actually having voting rights, discussing some pretty sensitive topics openly.
That must have caused some waves, too.
Oh, for sure. Again, different reactions. Traditionalists like Cardinal Burke raised concerns.
What kind of concerns?
Worries that it could make the church too, well, democratic, potentially undermining the hierarchy as they see it.
And the other side?
More progressive voices tend to see it as vital, as finally implementing the spirit of the Second Vatican Council, Vatican II.
That big council back in the 60s.
Right. Especially Vatican II's idea of the sensus fidelium, the sense of the faithful, the belief that the Holy Spirit guides the whole church, not just the leadership.
So beyond the idea, the theory of synodality, are there actual concrete changes? Has it changed how things are governed?
Yes. Definitely. There are tangible things. He set up the Council of Cardinals, that group advising him on reforming the Vatican administration, the Curia.
Okay.
Then there's the new constitution for the Curia itself, Predicate Evangelium. A big deal there is that it allows lay people, even women, to head some Vatican departments. That's new.
That is significant.
And there's also been some decentralization, pushing certain decisions down to local bishops' conferences. We saw hints of that in Amoris Laetitia guidelines, and also with some liturgical matters in Desiderio Desideravi.
Okay, so more collaboration, more local input. But then how do you square that with something like Traditionis Custodes?
Yes. The document restricting the use of the older pre-Vatican II Latin Mass.
That felt like a very direct top-down move. Doesn't seem very walking together.
It's a really important point, and it highlights the complexity. Francis argued that move was necessary for church unity.
Unity. How so?
His reasoning was that what started as a permission for a specific group who preferred the old rite had, in some places, become a rallying point for rejecting Vatican II itself, creating division.
So he saw it as a threat to the council's reform.
Essentially, yes.
Yeah.
So it shows that while he promotes synodality, listening, participation, he absolutely still holds and will use that central papal authority if he thinks the fundamental unity of the church is at stake.
And the reaction to that decision?
Predictably strong. Many traditionalist Catholics felt betrayed, deeply hurt, like their spiritual life was being attacked.
Understandable from their perspective.
Yes, but his defenders would say it was a tough but necessary call to stop a deeper split, a potential schism from forming. It really underlines that tension.
Which brings us neatly to this ongoing tension, doesn't it? Between reform and continuity. It seems to run through everything we're discussing about his papacy.
It's probably the central dynamic, yes.
Yes.
Francis sees himself as implementing Vatican II's vision, a church engaged with the world, focused on pastoral care.
But his critics see it differently.
Yes. Critics like Cardinal Mueller worry that some reforms risk disconnecting the church from its essential traditions, from its roots.
And then you have others arguing the opposite.
Right. Theologians like Massimo Fagioli argue Francis actually represents an authentic development of tradition, maybe even recovering parts that got pushed aside over time.
So it's a fundamental disagreement about what tradition even means or how it develops.
Exactly. And that disagreement fuels so much of the heated debate you see, especially in Catholic media online. It gets very polarized.
The Vigano affair comes to mind as well. That was a very public, very aggressive challenge to his authority.
Yes, regardless of the specifics there, it was a stark example of just how duped the opposition to his reform agenda runs in some quarters.
Okay, let's broaden the lens again. Beyond the internal church stuff, Francis has been a really prominent voice on the world stage, hasn't he?
Absolutely. A major global moral voice. His stance on issues like climate change, Laudato Si, was groundbreaking.
And economic inequality, we touched on that. Nuclear disarmament, too.
Yes. His address to the UN General Assembly laid those out very clearly. He sees the church as having a role, a responsibility, to speak on these critical global challenges.
Even during the pandemic, his calls for fair vaccine distribution.
Right, constantly pushing for global solidarity, for equity. It's consistent with his focus on the marginalized just on a global scale.
And his big encyclical, Fratelli Tutti, All Brothers, seems to tie a lot of this together.
It really does. Fratelli Tutti lays out this vision of universal fraternity, social friendship. It's a powerful critique of things like nationalism, isolationism, market fundamentalism.
He directly challenges the dogma of neoliberal faith, as he puts it.
He does. And he advocates instead for dialogue, solidarity, respect across all divides. It's quite a radical vision in today's world.
He's also put a lot of energy into interfaith relations, hasn't he?
A huge amount, especially building bridges with the Muslim world. That document on human fraternity he signed with the Grand Imam of Al-Azhar, Ahmad Al-Tayyib, was historic.
And his visits to places like Iraq, the Arabian Peninsula,
Yeah.
unprecedented for a pope.
Absolutely. These aren't just symbolic visits. They're about building real relationships, practical cooperation for peace and justice between different faiths.
So, looking ahead now, what about his legacy? The future direction? He's getting older, of course.
Yes, his age and health are factors people watch naturally.
Yeah.
But he seems determined to keep pushing forward with his vision.
And one concrete way he's shaping the future is through appointments, right? Especially the cardinals who will elect the next pope.
That's arguably one of his most significant long-term impacts. Something like 73%, nearly three-quarters of the current cardinal electors were appointed by him.
Wow, that's a huge majority.
It is. And he's deliberately made the College of Cardinals much more geographically diverse, bringing in bishops from the peripheries, from Asia, Africa, Latin America, not just the traditional European setters.
What does that mean for the next conclave, the next election?
Well, it doesn't guarantee his successor will be a carbon copy, of course, but it makes a sharp U-turn, a complete reversal of his main priorities, seem much less likely. The center of gravity has shifted.
What are the big challenges that aren't going away anytime soon? What will the next pope, whoever it is, still have to deal with?
Oh, the list is still long. Declining mass attendance and disaffiliation, particularly in the West, that's huge.
The priest shortage in many places.
Yes, a persistent issue. The ongoing fallout from the sexual abuse crisis, the need for accountability, transparency, healing, that's far from over.
And the gap between church teaching on some issues, like sexuality, and where wider secular society is.
That divergence continues to grow, creating real pastoral challenges. These are deep, complex problems.
But it's not all challenges and decline, is it? Are there signs of life, of vitality?
Definitely. You absolutely have to look at the growth in Africa. The church there is booming, dynamic. That's shifting the global balance significantly.
Interesting.
And you also see new movements, new communities, attracting young people who are looking for meaning, for community. Plus, as we've said, that moral voice on social issues, it still resonates widely, even outside the church.
And engaging young people specifically seems really important to Francis.
Very much so.
Yeah.
He held that whole synod dedicated to young people back in 2018.
Right.
And you hear it in his talks, especially at things like World Youth Day. He encourages them to be protagonists of change, to get involved, to shake things up. He wants faith to connect with their lives, their concerns about justice, about the world.
So if you had to sum up his overall approach, his way of leading.
I'd say it's characterized by trying to hold different things together, often things that seem in tension, like balancing rules and encounter, discernment and principles, mercy and judgment, reaching out widely, but also sometimes drawing sharp lines, like with traditionalist custodes.
The both-hand approach.
Exactly. Trying to navigate the complexities of faith in the real world, which isn't always neat and tidy. Avoiding simple, rigid answers where they don't fit the reality.
So, looking crystal ball gazing a little, what are the possible futures? Will the reforms continue? Could there be a swing back the other way?
All seem possible, don't they? You could see continued reforms, maybe modified. You could potentially see a successor who emphasizes tradition more strongly, a pendulum swing.
Or something in between.
Or something that tries to consolidate Francis's changes while perhaps addressing some of the anxieties they caused. That shift southwards, the growing influence of the church in Africa and Asia, that will definitely play a huge role. The tension between tradition and change isn't going away.
You mentioned a metaphor he uses, the polyhedron. Can you remind us what that means?
Ah, yes, from Fratelli Tutti. He uses the image of a polyhedron. It's a solid shape with many flat faces, like a crystal.
Okay.
His point is that unity isn't about being a perfect, smooth sphere where everyone is identical. It's more like this polyhedron, where each different face, each different culture or perspective contributes to the whole, reflects light differently, but is still part of the one object.
Unity and diversity.
Precisely. It's a vision where differences are respected, valued even, as part of a richer whole. That's his ideal, I think, for the church and for the world.
So, wrapping this up, our deep dive into the Francis papacy, what's the main takeaway for you?
I think it's undeniable that he's profoundly shifted the conversation in Catholicism. He's put mercy, outreach, service to the poor, and marginalized right back at the center.
Yeah.
His papacy is defined by that push and pull between tradition and reform, adapting to today's world. And that's created, well, both incredible inspiration for many and real tension for others. It's been dynamic, to say the least.
And why should this matter to you, our listener, whether you're Catholic or not?
Well, because watching how a huge, ancient global institution like the Catholic Church grapples with change gives you, I think, really valuable insight.
Insight into what?
Into how any large organization, any community really, deals with modernity. The themes are universal, aren't they? Tradition versus change, connecting with younger generations, faith meeting social justice issues. These questions pop up everywhere.
So a final thought to leave you with. Consider this. How are institutions in your own world, maybe your workplace, your community group, even your country, handling similar pressures? That tension between sticking to core identity and needing to adapt to a world that's changing incredibly fast.
What can we learn from Pope Francis's papacy? From both the successes and the challenges, what does it teach us about leading through times of really significant change?
Yeah, something to chew on. We hope this deep dive has given you a clearer view of this complex, ongoing story, a story with echoes for all of us.